This is an experiment. I usually try to keep my videos short, but because now YouTube can let you jump from chapter to chapter, I'm going to see if this flexibility will make a long form video more of an option to use in the future. So I'm counting on you. Today we're going to talk about the fill tool. That's the paint bucket icon here. A panel opens up called the subtool fill. And we have the subtool fill panel here. And if that's not open, you go to window, down to subtool fill. Mine is already checked. So when I click it, I will be closing that window. So I'm going to do it again and open it. The fill tool drops color. That's it. The color keeps spreading until it reaches an edge. When I click here, the whole area is filled, as you can see. Now the fill tool wasn't made to roll alone, or this would be the end of the tutorial. It has to hook up with something. Right now, it's just a layer. And the layer is always going to be involved, like that third wheel. And that's because I have it checked to refer only to the editing layer. And the editing layer is the layer that you are working on currently. When refer only to editing layer selected, you look down to the tool property panel and we see in the header that it has refer only to editing layer. Now when you select something else in the subtool fill, like refer other layers, it changes in the tool property panel also. Now when I select refer other layers in the subtool panel, I have to have refer multiple layers selected in the tool property panel. So you see how that changes when I go back and forth between the editing layer and other layers. Also notice that the settings available on the tool property change a little depending on the selected subtool. The subtool and tool property go together like hot dogs and buns, peanut butter and jelly, tofu and, well, tofu doesn't go with anything. The first three subtools have closed gap in the tool property panel. Leave opacity set at the default 100%. The auto select tool, the magic wand icon, and the tool property panel work together similarly. Now when I select refer other layers in the subtool panel, I have to have refer multiple layers selected in the tool property panel. So when I select on the color now, it's also looking at the other layers. Now I have the fill tool selected. So I fill this with a new color. And you can see it didn't get some of the sneakers. So that meant there were some gaps. And the color filled in the sneakers. Close gap works by having the fill tool ignore gaps in the line art and fill the area anyway. Like magic. The 5 squares represent the size or sensitivity of the hole that the fill tool would look for in the art. Close gap works best with clean lines. You specify a gap size by clicking the arrow and typing in a number. It's impossible to give you an average to use because the gap size varies because of canvas size, resolution, and the size of the gap. So each piece of art will be different and you have to make adjustments as needed. Fewer squares represent selected fewer gaps, and the more chosen squares fill more gaps. A higher gap size chosen may keep fill tool from filling in narrow spaces in the line art. You can prevent this by clicking fill narrow areas. So here I'm filling in parts of the jacket. You see it doesn't go all the way. I'm going to Windows, Subtool Detail, and I'm going to check fill narrow areas and click the eye icon so it becomes visible. So here it is under close gap, and you can check the plus or minus icon to make that visible. Now you see the difference when I click in that area. Now it fills in the whole range of that area. I've seen people talk about the tolerance tool, but they don't get it quite right. So here I'm lowering the tolerance, making it lower or higher. So here I've set it low, 8.7. Go into my color wheel. Now when you go up and down vertically, That is where the value is, and the tolerance is picking the value. So if I select here red, the pixel that I've picked is the value of that color. So if I keep the pixel in the same place and select green, it's the same value as the red I just chose. And the same with the blue. Now let's say I want to change those colors. So I'm selecting the orange. And the tolerance is set low. So now it doesn't look beyond what's already set. So I can select each one of those squares individually, the red, green, and blue. But if I set the tolerance high, look what happens. All three are selected because they are of the same value. And that is what the tolerance tool does. It chooses value. It's not looking at color. It's not looking at saturation. Only value. Now here you see the area scaling tool. Specifies whether to scale the area up or down. Click inside the pants. And here you see it's set to darkest pixel. Next selection is round, next one is rectangle. But if I select to darkest pixel, it's the best one to use. The tolerance was low. So now if I make that at 100%, you see it goes beyond the pants. And that's because it's looking at all the layers. So now I click fill up to vector path, and now it stops at the pants where I want because it stops at the vector. And vector is what you should use all the time, but that's a conversation for another day. My anti-aliasing is off. I set the tolerance lower, and I set my area scaling lower. Fill the pants again. Make the area scaling minus, and you see it fills a few pixels inside the pants. So plus is up, minus is down. Think of minus as contracting and plus as expanding into the area. Now that we have some basics under our belt, let me show you how to make a flat of a figure. And this is a flat color, of course. Select the fill tool. Choose close and fill to quickly create silhouettes of your figures or objects. In the tool property panel, make sure target color is area surrounded by black, which will be the line art, or only white and transparent for more complex fills. Area scaling is set to 1, so the color will bleed under the line art. Refer multiple layers is checked. Fill up to vector path is checked. I strongly suggest you always use vector art, but that's another conversation. Draw around the area you want to fill, and the tool identifies the closed areas and fills them. You can also draw outside the canvas. Adjust closed gap and tolerance as needed. Okay, so that filled the figure, but it also filled the area in between her afro puffs. So I'm going to change the closed gap, lower that from 5 squares to 4. Let's see what happens now. But her right ear still has some color in between it and the afro puff. So I'm going to increase the tolerance and circle again to close and fill. And that seems to be a very stubborn area. So that means there's going to be some cleanup. And in any case, no matter what, there's always going to be some cleanup when you're using the fill tool. So you're not going to escape that. So let's show you one way to do some cleanup. So I would choose the auto select tool, refer to other layers, select that pesky area between the ear and the afro puff, and delete it on the launch bar, and it is no longer an issue. And so there we have a nice flat silhouette of the figure done. Now let's look at how to make a border around the art. Select the Auto Select tool and choose Refer to All Layers in the Tool Property panel. Choose a minus amount of area scaling to make a border around the art. Select the background with the Auto Select tool with Refer to All Layers selected. Adjust close gap and tolerance as needed. The marquee moves a certain amount of pixels away from the object. Invert the selection. On the layer beneath, use Rectangular Fill tool to create a black or white outline around the object. Now let's get rid of all that, start fresh, and create an outline around the figure with an outline. Select the color layer. Leave the tolerance where it is, and I'm bringing the area scaling all the way up to 20, and 20 pixels is the max. This is why I showed you the other method previously. Invert the selection. On the menu, go down to Edit and down to Outline Selection. And you have three options: draw outside, draw on the border, or draw inside. Select the number of pixels that you want the outline to be, so it's kind of like you're filling in the outline. And for expansion type, the first icon is for hard edges, and the second one is rounder for smoother edges. And click OK. And now I have a border, and if you look at the layer, you'll see that it's just the outline, which was different from what we saw before, where the whole figure was filled in with white. Okay, so we touched on the Close and Fill tool earlier, but now I'm going to show you the true power of the Close and Fill tool. Because that was a large figure, but it's really ideal for using on small areas that you want to be filled. So I've circled the sleeve. You see it got a little bit over. And also, if you don't circle something completely, it won't close and fill. You have to make sure the area is completely closed with line art. Now I'm going to do the other sleeve. Fill that with yellow. I'm going to select a different color for the top part of the pattern on her jacket. Now I'm going to select the color red because I want to fill in the triangles. And here is the true power. See, you can select multiple elements at a time rather than going one by one with the fill tool to fill it in. But I've designed myself into a corner because I can't do that on all of them, because otherwise it won't know that I want the point to be up on the triangles that I'm using. So I kind of have to go one by one if I want to be sure to get what I want. But you can see in the earlier ones that I selected 3 at a time. That's the good benefit of Close and Fill, I should say, is that you can select more than one enclosed area at a time. So this is the time-saving benefit and the efficiency of the tool. Now I'm only going to use the Fill tool to quickly fill in the other parts of the character's clothing. So I'm only using the Fill tool here, nothing special. So I'm going to speed this up so we can keep moving. Keep it moving. Because all is not lost. That's why I created this design. So now I can circle all of these little rectangles and make them all black. Missed a few, so I can go back one by one. But you can see I saved so much time doing it this way rather than using the paint bucket to go one by one. And to continue, now I want to put a color behind the little black rectangles. So I'm drawing a red line on the layer above the yellow. So I've drawn my line. I have paint unfilled area selected, target all colors, and now I have my red stripe, but I see there's a little pixelation I'm seeing. So I want to change the area scaling, put a check mark to turn that on. Now it's at 10, and now I have a completely filled red stripe. Paint unfilled areas can be done by dragging a tool as if tracing the area you want to fill, and allows you to fill open gaps of white or blank pixels in the area. And it's okay to go outside the lines. The Paint Unfilled Area subtool recognizes any shape with closed lines. Right now I have Refer Other Layers selected. And when I try to fill the pants, it fills everything. And I'm on my color layer, which is a blank layer. Now I select Refer Multiple, and now it's looking at everything, all the layers. And so this isn't good. It's looking at the background and the figure line work. So let's undo all of that. Now I'm going to select my figure line work as editing layer, but I'm still not working. That's because I also have to select Refer to Editing Layer in the Tool Property panel. And now we can see it's working exactly as advertised, and only looking at the editing layer, which is the line layer, while I fill with color on the color layer. Use color from reference images. Now in order to do that, I need to bring a reference image into Clip Studio Paint. So I go to Windows, Subview, and I click on the folder icon to add an image or images. Click Open. Actually, you're going to add one image at a time. You're going to work with one image at a time. So here I have my folders, my layers, and I have my reference layer selected to multiply. And I'm going to choose that as my reference layer because last time I didn't have it set to multiply and we couldn't see beneath it. And I want these background colors to be underneath the figure, not on the same layer as the figure. Now I'm using the eyedropper tool to select colors from the image and then use those colors on the layer, background layer that I have. The fill layer. So I have select refer to editing layer only. And you can see I have a blue silhouette already created. So I'm going to select that. Then I go to new layer, fill, and choose a color. Click OK. And I have that new color. And it's on a separate layer, a new layer. And you can see the mask. And when I make the figure layer invisible, you see it's a nice clean silhouette of green. Now let's change the color of the fill layer. I can use the object tool and just pick colors very quickly. Or I can change the fill color by selecting fill color here, and that's with the object tool selected also. And I can double click on the color icon to change the color. And I can also fill it with a gradient. So select gradient in the tool property panel, and then select any of the pre-made gradient colors. It's a nice rainbow. So not only with the gradients can I pick a gradient, but I can change the direction of the gradient. And as we move it to any location, and with the rainbow, it's easier to see how much I want to show. I can shorten the length of the gradients or lengthen it. And you can see there's a lot of flexibility there. Set as draft layer. Okay, now you can see that I have my line layer, and I've also have my sketch layer visible, and I have set refer to other layers. There's my sketch layer underneath my line art. Now I'm going to fill my color layer, and you can see that the color looked at the sketch layer and didn't fill anything in there where the sketch is, as well as the line art. So now let's start clean, and I'm going to select the sketch layer and go down to layer settings and set as draft layer. Now go back to my color layer and apply the color, and now you see that the sketch layer has been ignored. So the set as draft layer is similar to a non-printing layer, and there you have your nice clean white silhouette. This is useful when you have a lot of layers and you don't want to turn everything off, and you just want to have the fill to ignore that layer. I have a layer above my color layer, which I'm going to clip to that color layer and lock the pixels around the color. So now when I choose to color, I have to make my layer visible. And now I can fill it in with some pretty flowers with my flower brush. So not only can you use this with a layer, but you can use it, clip it to a folder. So here's my folder with my color. And I'm going to clip it. You still use clip to layer below. It's going to look inside the folder, and I can still paint with some pretty flowers. It doesn't go outside the pixels that are already present because it's locked to only look at the pixels that are present and ignores transparent pixels. Okay, now we're going to look at how to lock transparent pixels. Here you can see I just color all over the place. And now I'm going to select a layer. Go to layer settings and lock transparent pixels. So now the transparent pixels can't be touched. So it works in a similar way to clipping layer below, except that this time I'm still working on the actual layer with the art, whereas the clipping layer is above the art layer. And another way to do this is to go to the lock transparent pixels icon. Now let's convert to a selection layer. Draw a selection area with the selection tool. Then go to the select menu, convert to selection layer. The selection area will appear on the newly created selection layer. The selection area appears in green above the canvas. A selection layer can be shown or hidden using the Show Hide Layer icon on the layer panel. Draw on the selection layer to edit the selection area. Go to the Select menu, convert Selection Layer to Selection option, and this creates a selection from a selection area. I'm going to create a layer above that, hide my selection layer, and now I can use the Fill tool to fill this with a color, pattern, or gradient. And that is the selection layer, folks. Now, after you've filled a color, you can still make some changes with the correction layer. Right-click, Layer, New Correction Layer, Tone Curve. And you can use any adjustment layer to make a fill layer whatever you want. In this case, we're doing highlights and shadows. For highlights, move tone curve upwards. And for shadows, move the tone curve downwards. So I have the layer selected that I want to create a mask for, and I'm using the selection tool. You can use any selection tool to create a mask. So I have my lightning bolt here. Go to the layer menu, layer mask, mask selection. The layer mask is applied to the selected area, and the layer mask will appear in the layer panel. Go to my fill tool, and I have the mask selected, and if I click inside the area that's masked, I can bring back that area and change the mask if I want. We'll start with a fresh mask. Now let's reset that. Control Z, back to my selection, and this time I'm going to do the reverse mask outside selection. So you can see the mask looks different. Black conceals and white reveals. I clicked outside to get a fresh mask. Now also if I click on the figure, not the mask, I can fill that with color. After all, this is a fill tool tutorial, not a mask tutorial. Also, I can edit the mask, and I have to have the mask selected, so I can use a pen or brush tool to add something to the mask. So select the figure, get my fill tool, and I can fill that with a color, pattern, or gradation. And here we are. Delete a mask. Go to the layer menu, layer mask, delete mask to delete the mask. Apply mask to layer. Go to the layer menu, layer mask, apply mask to layer to combine the layer and the layer mask together. This deletes the layer mask. Quick mask. Now quick mask creates selection areas with pen and brush tools, and you can easily make selection with complex shapes on the visible image. Yet it keeps the texture from the brush. Choose the select menu, quick mask, to turn it on. This creates a quick mask in the layer panel. With a drawing tool, brush, or pen, draw on the quick mask. The selection is displayed in red. The quick mask is a temporary layer. In the select menu, select quick mask again to remove the check mark and create a selection area from the quick mask. The layer disappears. The drawing is now a selection that can be filled with a solid color or gradient or pattern. Or I could have used the launcher, so I'll delete the fill and use the fill icon on the launcher. So you don't have to go all the way to the toolbar because it's right there, very handy. I'm going to show you 3 methods to add shadows and highlights. I'm using blue and yellow for the first 2 methods. However, you will have to choose colors that work well with the colors on your underlying layers. But these are good as a general guide to start with. Method 1, guidelines with the fill tool. I've created a new folder for my shadows and highlights and made that my reference layer. All layers within this folder are only where the fill tool will look. I've created separate layers for my shadows and highlight guidelines. I'll start defining the shadow areas first using a contrasting line color with the pen tool. I select Paint Unfilled Area on a new layer above the folder and drag with the fill tool with a bluish color. I set that layer's blending mode to multiply, turn off the guide layer, and voila, I get my shadow. Now, define the highlight areas with the pen tool using a contrasting line color, just as I did with the shadow. I select Paint Unfilled Area and drag with the fill tool with a yellow color. Turn off the guide layer. I set that layer to soft light, and shazam, I get my highlight. Method 2, Selection tool with Fill tool. Here you see I've created separate layers for my shade and highlights above the color layer. I use the lasso tool to select the shadow areas to be filled on my shade layer. Egads, I selected an area I didn't want. I can use the Erase Selection tool to get rid of that. Whew, that could have been a disaster. Now I use the launch bar to select the Fill tool to add bluish color. I set that layer to multiply, turn off the guide layer, and I get my shadow. No voila this time. I use the lasso tool to select the highlight areas to be filled on my highlight layer. Use the launch bar to select the fill tool to add a yellow color. I set that layer to soft light and turn off the guide layer, and I get my highlight. Method 3, Pen tool with Fill tool. Now use the eyedropper to select the same color to be filled on the shade layer. I've created separate layers for my shade and highlights above the color layer. I have the shade layer set to multiply and the light layer set to screen. I use the pen tool to select the shade layer to be filled on my shadow layer. This time I have the fill tool set to refer only to editing layer. Shadows are complete. Now use the pen tool to select the highlight areas to be filled on my light layer. Use the fill tool again. Highlights are completed. As with all art, traditional or digital, there's going to be some cleanup or touch-up involved. And I haven't been doing it as I've been going along. Well, I have been doing it a little. This gives me opportunity again to show you the power of the layer folders. I have everything in my layers, all the layers in a folder, and you can see they all have things that need to be touched up in the same spot. So rather than going through each separate layer, I'm going to use the power of the layer folder to go and touch up and clean up this art where some of the fill has spilled over that I didn't do the first time. So I have add to selection, so I can just keep going and get all of these little spots until they're all selected. And obviously I could have spent a little time and changed the tolerance and area scaling or close gap, any of the tools that we've looked at to do that. But I was kind of zipping along, trying not to make this a long video and get every little thing, just trying to give you the broad picture. So now I have everything selected, so I can delete, but oops, deleted some of the line art. I don't want that to happen. So I will deselect the line art, and you see I have the layer folder selected, delete again, and now only the color has been deleted. That one little thing escaped, so let me take care of that and delete it. And now the art is all cleaned up. A final note for you. When you become a super user and are very experienced with setting your parameters for the fill tool, you can use an all-in-one solution. Go to Edit and down to Advanced Fill, and you can see that you have almost everything you need that was done on all these different panels now in one panel. And you can make your settings here. That's it for today. I hope you found it helpful and will use it a lot. Bye. Well, that's all for today. If you've learned something today, this has value to you, please like, share, and comment. I'd like to hear from you. And subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And remember, just create.